let us all do we can to build a better future.
All right, folks, returning for the 5th time here on our show, investigative reporter, contributor at the Misuse Network. He's done a lot of great content on Convo Couch, on Nico House's channel as well, and numerous other colleagues within the Misuse Network.
If he does anything more productive, he might be called Russian.
Yeah, there we go. So that he might get canceled or be called right wing or whatever. Point is, this is the individual that's been covering obviously dark money in the Democratic Party as well as the ongoing disaster of the Colonial pipeline. Everyone, give it up for investigative reporter Robbie Jaeger. Thank you so much for being back onto our show. Good to have you back.
What's up, guys? It's been a while, but I'm glad to be back. Yeah, racking up the guest spots here, so I feel fortunate. So appreciate you guys having me on again.
Yeah, if you get 5 more, we send you a sandwich.
There you go. So, yeah.
I'll take it.
It might not be good by the time it reaches you, but it will be good when it's sent off.
I'm about to say, as you can see, I need it.
Well, anyways, it's really great to have you back on. I know that you took a hiatus, and quite recently you were on Primo Radical's channel addressing dark money in the Democratic Party. Now, the thing is, when we talk about dark money in the Democratic Party, we're thinking about corporatists, we're thinking about people like Nancy, Chucky Boy Schumer, anyone that's an establishment Democrat. However, in recent findings, there's been a lot of progressive groups that have been connected with dark money. And I think it's only fair for our viewers and subscribers to kind of get kind of a beginning of what happened with Justice Democrats, Sunrise Movement. Robbie, what's exactly going on? Because I know this is still ongoing, but when we think about the Justice Democrats and look back at them in 2018, let's face it, even I had hoped that maybe this organization could reform the Democratic Party.
Hey, look, I mean, that's and maybe in the beginning they could have, and that's the thing though with a lot of these groups is that honestly, there's a brand in being a progressive now just as much as there are genuine people out there that are actually trying to affect change. And part of the nonprofit industrial complex and political industrial complex to a degree is that you have to take advantage of those good willing people and unite them behind your cause, no matter what your cause is. And of course, that's why we see so much of this billionaire infiltration, co-optation, and so many of these groups. And like you said, it's more prominent with like Sunrise, and then there's other groups that bill themselves as big progressive, like Center for Popular Democracy, and then there's like Indivisible, stuff like that. But all of these organizations are basically under an umbrella of not just random billionaires, right? These are not like the DNC influencers, so to speak, the big boys that are writing the big checks that fund all these super PACs that you hear so much about, like Priorities USA, Future Forward, stuff like that. So if you're on the progressive kind of, if you are a progressive voter and, you've got, say a Sunrise Movement or a Justice Democrats taking big checks or substantial amount of funding, either from the political spectrum for their super PAC or their PAC that they have going on, or on the nonprofit side, which we mostly see because it's easier to slip in anonymous money that way, or it takes longer to get the data out, that's problematic, or at least it should be, because you don't want that commingling of influence that, you're seeing from the big boys that are funding the big stuff at the DNC are now making up a large portion of the funding of these so-called progressive organizations. It's just a bad look because there's really no accountability for really anybody in this situation, as far as, is there anybody pulling strings? Is there any strings attached to these checks that are being written? Of course, everybody will always say no. All right. I mean, you'd be a fool to say yes in any regard. Right. But, it's like I said, that's where we're at now with what I found recently, which, like I said, when we're talking in the grand scheme of like money amounts, dollar amounts, it's really not maybe like the largest thing in the world. But you have to, put it in perspective with Justice Democrats. In 2019, they started, or in 2018, they started a nonprofit arm of 501c4, which is otherwise known as a dark money group. And it was called Organized for Justice, right? And I think a lot of people may have heard of that. They're involved in a lot going on. So, what they've done is, they went from like a $50,000 start in 2018 to $1 million or over $1 million in 2019. And it took them forever, right, to get their 2019 finances out somehow, some way. But once they finally did, we realized that, you know, George Soros, you know, is the one that has basically funded at least 25% of their entire year's, you know, funding, which, you know, again, is not trying to pull out that whole like, ooh, Soros boogeyman stuff. Actually, it's the fact that, again, we're not talking about like not just some ordinary DNC mega donor. We're talking about somebody that just pledged $125 million for the midterm, somebody that is still very active and very influential in DNC communities and circles. I mean, people are still going to him, trying to do whatever they can to get him to write the giant check for them. And again, when you start seeing that commingling, okay, you know, is Soros actively involved in the decision making of this organization that's tied to Justice Democrats, or is he not? And it wouldn't matter if it was Soros or not, but you know, what I always say is like, well, why does Soros come up so much? It's like, well, we wouldn't have to talk about him so much if his name literally didn't come up in all of these, or so many of these situations. When we're looking at big funding for liberal organizations like this.
Well, let's also look at something else here too, especially after 2018, when there was this wave of progressives entering into the Democratic Party, running on the notion of, okay, we're going to raise the ruckus, we're going to fight for Medicare for all, we're going to challenge party leadership, and for the first, I guess, few months of it, we were seeing AOC organize a protest in front of Nancy Pelosi's office. But now, as we have entered into the year of 2022, what we're seeing from these very same individuals from 2018 is they're not raising the ruckus, they're towing the party line. And in many ways, now Justice Democrats is just another brand of the vote blue no matter who machine, where it's, okay, you got to support Democrats because the Republicans are just so bad. But again, this is dark money that's influencing a lot of individuals who are trying to, I guess, maybe reform the Democratic Party. But the issue is that, well, how much of a long-lasting impact does this have on future elections? Because we just got done with the 2020 presidential election cycle. And now here we are into the midterms. And there is this whole new wave of progressives, incumbents right now at the point, who are trying to fill the seats of Democratic lawmakers that are retiring. Most notably, Representative I just messed up her name. Sirios, so who was head of the DCCC. That's in the 17th Illinois Congressional District, and there are numerous contenders for that seat. But however, when it comes down to organizations like the Justice Democrats, are they influencing all these new incumbents that are now coming into power, or trying to get fill in that seat of these Democratic lawmakers that are now retiring?
Well, I don't know if they're actually influencing, but I know for a fact they seem like they like to think they are. And at least they want that to keep up the appearance that, you know, their endorsement still matters for progressives. And I feel like in a lot of circles it probably does. But like I said, the only problem is that they won't, you know, really, like, they haven't really been doing what they said they would do, making the ruckus, pushing, you know, for a radical agenda. In the end, it's been basically, you know, vote blue no matter who. You know, they haven't really tried to fight for what they always said they would. But I feel like the bigger problem is that, you know, I'm always an advocate for, if we can't get campaign finance fixed, right? If we can't get this big money, this dark money, and out of politics, and cut down the size of the influence that the billionaire class has over this type of thing, then we're never going to really be able to get any other kind of reform meaningfully pass through, because the big interests will still just be there to block it no matter what. And whether that's up front or, you know, going the long way around, which is getting you to trust a so-called grassroots organization built on a certain message, and then have that message slowly change. It's like the old trick of, you know, moving your buddy's table like a quarter inch to the left for every day for a month, and see if he notices how far you could get it across the room. Before you know it, he may not have even realized that you moved it. You know, it's that mentality that if we slowly change something, they won't notice that they've drifted, you know, farther to the right, or towards the center, should I say, than originally. And now you've got all of these people that you've basically cultivated into backing your agenda, thinking it's progressive, but really just serving what you want, which is, kind of where I feel like we've been at now, especially since the 2020 election. Look, long lasting impacts. 2020 was the biggest year for dark money, specifically in history. Obviously, it was the most expensive election in history. 2022, the midterms are going to be the same, and and then so far and so forth, because we're heading in the wrong direction. There's no meaningful reform coming. And as a matter of fact, donation limits are increasing. Citizens United keeps unlimited super PAC spending in place. And the saddest part is that so many progressive institutions and organizations are willingly embracing this strategy now. And even though they built their careers off of saying that that's the wrong way to do politics, and that the billionaire class and dark money shouldn't have an influence. And yet whenever it comes knocking on their door, almost every time they willingly embrace it, or they throw their hands up and say, well, we can't just unilaterally disarm. I'm sure everybody's heard that one, which is just bogus. Honestly, it doesn't make any sense. But that's where we're at right now, and it's kind of disheartening, but we're going to see how it goes as we go into 2022 proper, because it's really about to pop off now.
No, it's interesting. I want to pull up one of the tweets here, because again, all of our viewing audience can see in the show notes subscription box below, links to our stories. But obviously, the first tweet, you mentioned it earlier in this interview about the updates, what's happening with the Justice Democrats, or 501. 501c4, and how it's basically, again, in 2019, they were able to raise that amount of money. But then if we look at the next tweet as well, we see how No Excuses PAC, at the Justice Democrats spinoff, aimed at Mansion Cinema, raised about $69,000 during the back half of 2021. They ran no ads, but they paid their founder, Corbin Trent, $53,000. And you also went on to say, too, in fact, of the $136K they spent in 2021, only $14K was spent for ads, while Trent, this guy, was paid $90K plus 66%. So there you go. I mean, this is like, it's like at this point, this whole idea of voting blue no matter who, and you will have democracy, it's almost as if now any kind of notion of trying to bring in reform is just a fool's errand, and we got to look at different alternative paths now to try and at least fight for the people, because this whole idea of assuming that the Democrats can be formed from within is constantly trying to argue with the sea. You can't tell the tides to go back.
Well, I would say real quickly on the No Excuses PAC thing, is that unfortunately how I said that there's progressive candidates that are embracing the help of super PACs, but unfortunately there's become an ever increasingly large part of that progressive community that actually want to make that into a career. And Mr. Trent, who happens to be AOC's former comms director, he was also very involved in Justice Democrats as an organization, has now actually, him and a Justice Dems co-founder, Zach Exley, actually built it as, from the founders of Justice Democrats, like it was some kind of movie trailer when they first came out with it back in February. And basically, like I said, since the election was over, these guys need a paycheck. So instead of, you can't root for Bernie because Bernie's not running. So now you have to go over to the next best thing, or then what's the next cash cow? And that is anti-cinema, anti-mansion rhetoric, which they basically said, hey, we're going to blast the airwaves back during the stimulus discussion, basically saying that, they need to pass the $2,000 stimulus package, or we're going to vote you out. They wound up spending $14,000 on those ads in total, and the rest of that money has just been spent either on paying Trent $7,500 a month salary, or or hotel and airfare was getting the majority of it. And then in the complete back half of 2021, again, they spent no money in the ads. Almost all of the money went to Mr. Corbin Trent here, who's made a fat probably $90K at least just since February for practically, in my opinion. I mean, because what super PACs, their point is to basically disseminate media and messages, do commercials, radio ads, stuff like that, mailers, direct mailers, whatever. They basically had started off saying they were going to do anti-mansion and cinema ads. They did at the bare minimum, and now they've changed their rhetoric to recruiting the next AOC, which obviously they've made no progress in doing. And so now basically Corbin Trent is just making, a nice little fat check, and that's saying it might not be like the biggest scandal in the world or whatever, but I do feel like it's important that we kind of realize that like what the game is and how it's being played, because it is being played.
And it's interesting to point out, people are tired of being played. People are wising up to the fact that the Democrats are just as corrupt as the Republicans. Republicans are just as corrupt as Democrats. Not the voters, it's these politicians. And it's an ongoing game. And the thing is, they're owned by corporate interests, the same people who fund the Republican Party, the same people who fund the Democratic Party. And we're seeing this nightmare keep on repeating itself over and over again. And I think it's very important that we do shine a light on it. And while it may not be popular, at least according to the liberal group circles that are out there, that, oh, how dare you be critical of Justice Democrats or AOC, they have to be open for criticism, because if they talk a good game about bringing reform and they don't do it, well, then we got to call them out on it. Just like how that one individual in Texas called out AOC for voting present on the Iron Dome, changing her no vote to a present. I mean, let's face it, that's something you have to be called out on. But another thing too, and I want to bring this up because while we still have you on, you have also been leading the conversation and the reporting on the disaster with the Colonial Pipeline Company. And again, I want to pull up this tweet right here. This is from you on February 9th. Colonial Pipeline Company is still pulling gasoline out of the oil in nature preserve at a clip of 30,000 gallons per month on average. At this rate, it'll officially become the largest pipeline spill in U.S. history by September. So again, it's still an ongoing disaster. The environmental impact is still being felt. What's happening in the state of North Carolina? What's happening with Colonial Pipeline? Is there any accountability? And here's the question I ask: how much worse can this get?
Well, as far if you believe what all the environmental agency and the company are, only thing that they are agreed on is that the drinking water has not been harmed, and everything else in that area, immediate vicinity, is pretty much screwed. In fact, to the point that Colonial Pipeline has spent millions of dollars buying people out of their homes in that area, just to get them away from the cleanup activities that will likely last for years. Because let's just face it, this happened in August of 2020. They're still pumping on average 32,000 gallons of gas out of the ground every month, and this is, 2020, here we are beginning of 2022. It's been like 15 months and we're still no closer to seeing those totals go down. We're at over 1.4 million gallons recovered so far. The largest pipeline spill in U.S. history was 1.68 million gallons. So we are rapidly approaching that total, and even totals that we're getting now, because Colonial Pipeline refuses to give an estimate of how much they think spilled, even though they had to revise their estimate prior to that 4 different times at request of state regulators, which I've covered in my reporting. And as far as where we're at here with the state of North Carolina, they went to court seeking to get a judge to compel Colonial Pipeline to give them that information and more. Colonial Pipeline, while there hasn't been a decision yet, Colonial Pipeline has retorted and basically said that they're not actually entitled to any of that information and that they're not going to get it. So basically what we're doing here is that there's a standoff between Colonial Pipeline and the state of North Carolina in front of a district judge. So that is to be determined whether or not the judge sides with the state and compels the company to give them all the information. And even if that's the case, if Colonial decides to appeal, we could be looking at a legal battle almost as long as the recovery efforts. So as far as accountability goes, there's really not been much yet. Like I've covered before, and you've had me on before, federal regulators kind of let Colonial Pipeline off scot-free, said, hey, don't do it again. Or we're going to ground you. They didn't actually, even though they've said that over and over, and they did it again, and they keep getting off. And there's been no accountability on a federal level. On a state level, I really don't know what they have the power to do, or if any fines or any penalties they can levy will really be a hurt to Colonial. But let's hope so, because it's been a long, protracted battle. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. And before the end of the year, we're going to be hearing you're going to see a lot of other reporters other than me pop up real quick and say, oh, there's a new largest pipeline spill, and it's going to be a Colonial one, and it should be sometime around September. It's going to be sad news because unfortunately, this could be an over 2 million gallon spill before it's all said and done, or even more.
Let's rewind back the clocks. 9 months ago, you appeared on our show for the very first time, and this is your 5th time here on our show. When it comes down to getting information, Freedom of Information Act, especially in regards to what's happening, how North Carolina is handling the federal government, your overall assessment of getting access to this kind of information, and since then, what has been your initial thought on all the powers that be that have failed miserably to really protect the people, not only in the state of North Carolina, but this is a nationwide issue, because what people don't seem to realize is just how vast the Colonial Pipeline network truly is, and the fact that 2 teenagers on ATVs found us, not on purpose, accidental.
And I also want to just comment on what you were saying as well. This is a point that everyone should remember, that in cases like this, that even if at some point they are found guilty, it's after spending millions of dollars, which you somehow acquired, to get enough lawyers together to fight their legion of lawyers, so that after they've already made the profit and extracted all that they're going to extract from the area and it's already been destroyed, they'll put a token amount of money out of like a fine of a percentage of their, it's like at most in these cases, you get back 10% of the profit that they take out of it, which is, from their point of a business strategy, a win-win.
Yep. So in the interest of brevity, I know, because Kit, that question you asked me about what's my assessment, I could go on all day. I could rant about that all day, because it's been a complete failure from the federal level, who I have FOIA'd. I want to know everything about how they handled this case, why it was so quick, why they settled so quietly. So I'm still waiting on that response. But as far as, who's to blame, federal government let them off the hook. The EPA basically walked by and said, we don't care. And state government's the only people trying to do anything to kind of hold them for any kind of accountability. And as far as your point, Daniel, I mean, look, the fact is that if this thing goes to like a political level in the state of North Carolina, which, to be honest with you, the Republicans aren't going to talk about it, obviously, and surprisingly, the Democrats don't care. Right? I've only seen one say anything about it.
But I've heard from everyone that Democrats are the good guys that we should vote for, because they're going to stop. You're telling me that's not the case in this case?
Oh, well, not in, especially not here. And also, I mean, I was in there was people that were running for as a progressive, right? On running on the Green New Deal for a Senate seat. They've since dropped out. That would not even really talk about this. And like I said, advocacy groups have completely ignored it, either on a state and a federal level, until it was far too late for it to matter, because it's not a very flashy story. And what's interesting, though, is that, again, when we're going to the court system, it's, the Colonial Pipeline's majority owners is Koch Industries. So in, state of North Carolina, on a state level and on a federal level, Koch Industries is very involved in the funding of a lot of these candidates or the super PACs that back them, especially on the Republican side of the coin, as you know. So it's really Koch Industries versus the people that they helped elect. And I don't expect much to come out of it, like on a court level. Yeah. But like, if they were to get dragged, is there going to be any like kind of change at a legislative level going forward, at least in the state of North Carolina? I don't really see it, as even Democrats in this state are typically pretty conservative. They're, your average Dixiecrat is pretty much, the Democrat here in North Carolina as well. So, unfortunately, it's a pretty sad situation, but it does seem that, at least in this case, the bureaucracy, at least one part of the bureaucracy, is trying to do its job. The North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality they have not let this go. They've been working on this case. I mean, the PIMSA, the federal agency that would oversee this matter, spent a whole 3 months on it and basically just let Colonial go. The DEQ here in North Carolina have been holding on to Colonial for the better part of 14, 15 months now, and with no end in sight. So, hats off to them. At least somebody's trying to do something. But yeah, Kit, this has been a complete failure of federal level, of, of advocacy, of politicians, of journalism in general, not you guys obviously, but the majority of journalists that should be covering this do not and have not. So thanks to you guys, at least there is a platform to at least get this story out there, because it is important. It affects everyone, not even if you live here or not. You could be a West Coaster. This could be Dapple in 20 years if we don't do anything about this. You know what I'm saying?
I hear you. And the thing is, you've been one of the leading investigative reporters on the disaster of the Colonial Pipeline. It's still a disaster. And I think we saw, especially in an unrelated case, but still related, just how powerful the oil corporations truly are. Look at the nightmare that Steven Donziger is still going through. He won against Chevron in Ecuador, and what was his reward for his victory? Almost 2 years and ongoing of confinement, and then even serving time behind bars, and then being taken away, being put into a halfway house. He's now thankfully outside. He's with his family and friends. But again, his whole living situation and his safety is at clear risk, because big oil is going to go after anyone that speaks out against their wrongdoings and their corruptions and their connections. And the thing is, we need people like Steven Donziger. We need people like you out there as well, Robbie Jaeger, who are speaking truth to power and actually been covering this. So sooner or later, be prepared to see a interesting expose piece by mainstream media, CNN or MSNBC, talking about the Colonial Pipeline. But by that point,
wait until after it's done and the situation's moved on and a thing can happen, they're like, we just discovered this new story that no one's been covering for the last years. We're the first to bring it up. Wolf Blitzer was really happy when we talked about this. I mean, the oil companies did make a lot of money. We did get that payout because, of course, they're all... Anyway, I'm getting on a tangent.
So I think as a final note for your story, what can our viewers and subscribers look forward to in regards towards your further ongoing investigation and covering of this story? And the second part, where can people find you online on social media, and are there any other groups you want to promote before we do end this live stream?
So, like I said, this is a slow case. As soon as basically we're tracking the totals month by month, since we don't have an estimate or any other thing. We basically just have to add, we're adding recovery totals month by month. That's how we're keeping track of how big the spill is. So at least a month, every month you'll get an update on the spill from me, unless something else comes out in between, in which case I will be the first person usually to get that out there. And if you want to see it, it'll probably happen on Twitter first. That's at RobletOFire. And my Substack is where I do a lot of my full-length articles. That will be jaeger.substack.com. And I do a lot of the stuff on there for free as well, so people can check it out before they feel like if they want to contribute or not. And the only thing I like to say before I always go, guys, is thanks once again for having me. And if any of your viewers have anything any time to kill later on the night and don't have anything to do, I encourage everybody to look up some literature on autism awareness, just so we can start creating a more educated and open and accepting society for our neurodiverse brothers and sisters out there. And other than that, guys, I will see you later.